Alright, we're still on 1.5. This is other types of equations, I guess is what it's called in Trig. This is just examples is all that this is. So solving an equation that looks like this is where we're at. So to get rid of a root, you got to square both sides. So I'm going to square both sides, but keep in mind this 2 has to go through to both. Okay, so that's a 4, and the square root of a square, that's just an x over here. So really this is the problem that we were looking at. And once again, remember, you cannot just square each thing. This actually means you write out x minus 8 times x minus 8 twice. So x times x is x squared. X times negative 8 is negative 8x. Negative 8 times x is negative 8x. Negative 8 times negative 8 is positive 64. And you have the 4x still on that side. So I combine my like terms to get a negative 16x, because negative 8 and negative 8 is negative 16. I notice it's a quadratic. So because I notice it's a quadratic, I'm going to move everything onto one side. So I'm going to move that 4x over. So it's a positive 4x. I'm going to subtract a 4x. So when I do that, I get x squared minus 20x plus 64. So let's see. What multiplies to give you 64 that adds to give you a negative 20? Okay, so thinking about it here, negative 4 and negative 16, right? Because negative 4 times negative 16 gives you 64, and negative 4 plus negative 16 gives you a negative 20. It works. So x minus 4 and x minus 6. So when I set each of those equal to 0 to solve, right? I add 4 to both sides to get x equals 4. I add 16 to both sides of this one to get x equals 16. And there are your two answers, 4 and 16. So I've got to check them to make sure it works. If I plug in a 4, right? If I plug in a 4, 4 minus 8 is negative 4. Square root of 4 is 2. 2 times 2 is 4. So negative 4 equals 4. That's not true. However, so 4 doesn't work, so let's try 16. 16 minus 8 is 8. And I plug that in there, that's a 4. 2 times 4 is 8, so 16 does work. So you just got to double check to make sure your answers work here sometimes. That's why it's always a good idea to plug in your answer choices to make sure that they work. With this one, we got a square root over here, so we are going to try to get rid of it by squaring both sides. And when we do that, I get x minus 1 squared, and the square root of a square cancels out, so I have 2x plus 1. This means I write x minus 1 twice. This is what I have right here, and now I'm going to FOIL. X times x is x squared. X times negative 1 is negative x. Negative 1 times x is negative x. Negative 1 times negative 1 is positive 1, and that equals 2x plus 6. So I combine my like terms. That's a negative 2x, and I have a positive 1 there. So we got a 2x plus 6 still on that side. I see it looks like I have a quadratic, so I'm going to try to push everything on over to that side. So minus 2x, so that gives me x squared minus 4x plus 1, and that equals 6. I'm going to subtract 6 onto that side to get a negative 5. So once again, you think of two numbers that multiply to give you negative 5, that add to give you a negative 4. And the only thing that comes to my mind is negative 5 and 1, because negative 5 plus 1 is negative 4. Negative 5 times 1 is negative 5. So I can split it up into x minus 5 and x plus 1. So when I separate each of those to solve, I would add 5 to both sides to get x equals 5. I'd minus 1 to both sides to get x equals 1. So your answers are 5 and negative 1. So let's check these answers to see if they work. If I plug in a 5, right, that's 5 minus 1 is 4. That's 10 plus 6, so I get 4 equals square root of 16, and that is true. If I plug in negative 1, I get a negative 2. That gives me a positive 4. Square root of 4 is positive 2 and negative 2, so it does not work. So 4 is the answer to, or not 4. 5 is the answer to the problem. So we do this again. I square both sides. So when I square both sides, that gets rid of the square root, so it's 3x plus 7, but I still have an x minus 1 squared on the other side, which means I have it twice. So I have to FOIL that side. X times x is x squared. x times negative 1 is negative x. Negative 1 times x is negative x. Negative 1 times negative 1 is positive 1. And we combine like terms. Negative x and negative x is negative 2x. I notice a quadratic again, so I'm going to move everything over to this side. So I'm going to minus a 3x. So I get x squared minus a 5x plus 1. I still have a 7 over here. Minus 7. So I end up with x squared minus 5x minus 6 equals 0. So I try to factor that. So it multiplies to give you negative 6 that also adds to give you negative 5. Well, negative 6 and 1, right? Because negative 6 plus 1 is negative 5. And negative 6 times 1 is negative 6. So those are our factors, a negative 6 and a positive 1. So when I separate this to solve, I'm looking to see what works. So I would add 6 to both sides, so we get x equals 6. I'd minus 1 on both sides to get x equals negative 1. And there are our two answers. So let's check them to see if they work. So I plug in a negative 1, sorry, we'll start with a 6. 3 times 6 is 18. 18 plus 7 is 25. Square root of 25 is 5, because 6 minus 1 is 5. So 6 works. So plug in a negative 1, I get 4 on that side, so the square root of 4 is 2. Over here I get a negative 2. Not the same, so they do not work. So only the 6 appears to be working in this problem. So square root of a square, I see that root on that side, so I'm going to square both sides. I have to take that through to both. 5 squared is 25. Square root of x squared is x. And this means I need to write it out twice. So 2x times 2x is 4x squared. 2x times negative 3 is negative 6x. Negative 3 times 2x is negative 6x. Negative 3 times negative 3 is positive 9. So negative 6 and negative 6 is negative 12x's. And since I notice a quadratic, I'm going to move everything over to one side. So that's why I'm moving that 25 over. So I end up with 4x squared minus 37x plus 9 equals 0. So I can slide and divide this to solve. 4 times 9 is a 36. So can I think of two numbers that multiply to give me 36 that add to give me negative 37? The answer is yes, negative 36 and negative 1. Because negative 36 plus negative 1 is negative 37. And negative 36 times negative 1 is positive 36. But remember, slide and divide, I slide by 4, so now I need to divide each of those by 4. So I get x minus 1/4, and 36 divided by 4 is 9. So you can just look at these and tell me the answer already. It's the opposites. So x equals 1/4 is an answer, because 1/4 minus a fourth is 0. And 9 is an answer because 9 minus 9 is 0. So 1/4 and 9 are the answers. But just so you can see the actual factors, you would slide that number up there. That's a 4x minus 1 and an x minus 9 are factors. So when I set them up to solve, I would add 1 on both sides, then divide by 4. So I get x equals 1/4. I would add 9 to both sides to get x equals 9. Check to see if they work. So I plug in 9. Square root of 9 is 3, so 5 times 3 is 15. 2 times 9 is 18. 18 minus 3 is 15, so yep, 9 works. Plug in a fourth. That gives me 1/2, right? Because square root of 4 is 2. Square root of 1 is 1. 5 times a half is 5 halves. On the other side, I end up with a half minus 3. So I got a positive 1 and a negative 1. They aren't the same, so they do not work. So 9 is the only answer that actually works. So if you have any other questions or concerns, I know this was a lot of the same type of problems with roots, but I did most of those because they are the most challenging ones and the ones that you'll run into the most. If you have any questions or concerns on any other ones, please email me, and maybe I can develop some more PowerPoints only related and send it around those. But if you have any questions or concerns, please let me know.